As my family, I have two siblings, a brother and a sister, and my parents as well have survived. We survived World War II. As in the Soviet Union, it no longer exists. Russia was at war with Germany. And there were very hard times. As a matter of fact, I was an avid reader. All I could find in the Soviet Union during the war times was a book on how to make iron.
Hey, Dad, before, can you guys hear us? No. Yes, no? Is this on? Yes. Okay, so we're going to get to, do you guys know where the Soviet Union is? My dad told me that. Okay, it was bigger than Russia, but now we call it part of it Russia. And my father, though, is actually from Poland. Now, how he ended up in Russia is a whole story that we'll get to.
No, we won't talk about that.
You won't talk about it?
It's too involved.
Not yet. First, Ruth, he wanted to tell you about what his life was like in Poland. Because as you'll find out while we talk, when the war started, my father was exactly your age. Okay, he was 9. So, and it started in September. Will you all be 9 by September? Yeah. You're not there. All right, so almost exactly your age. How about that? Okay, so before we get to the story of the war, though, Dad, can you tell them what life is like in Poland? So my father was from a town.
We used to go to...
Okay. What's the name of the town that you're from?
Radymno, it's on the River San.
And it's right here in Poland. Is it a big city?
No, maybe 200 Jewish families lived in town.
Okay, so there are probably more than 200 Jewish families in this school, for sure, right? Can you tell us what life was like there before the war?
Before the war, we kids went to public school, which was compulsory. 7 grades were compulsory. And then we went to Cheder. In the morning we went to the state school, and in the afternoon we went to Cheder. Cheder lasted as long as the rabbi wanted.
So what age were you when you started public school? How old were you when you started public school?
7 years old.
And how old were you when you started Cheder, Jewish school?
3 years old.
Aha, okay. Three, yeah.
3. They brought us in to Cheder to teach us the Aleph base. And Hebrew was the first language, first writing that we were acquainted with.
So you wrote Hebrew. What language do you speak?
Spoke Yiddish.
Spoke Yiddish and wrote Hebrew. And then do you remember what you learned in Cheder in 3rd grade? These guys are in 3rd grade.
Of course. We learned Gemara.
In 3rd grade?
We started at 9 years old. We started Bula Metzia.
When you were 9. Okay. And how was school, public school?
Public school was very hard. The Jewish kids were pretty smart. And we all wore payas. And the Gentile kids used to pull our payas.
And can you tell them what the teacher said to your mother? So they had I didn't know this, but apparently in Poland they had parent-teacher conferences just like they have in SAR. And when your mother came to talk to the teacher, what did the teacher
He
tell
said
her?
that it's a pity that I'm Jewish, because I was bright and I would go very far if I was Jewish. The Polish government persecuted the Jews, even so when they were resurrected in 1918, they had to sign a minority treaty. In other words, they undertook to respect and give all the rights of citizenship to the minorities. They had Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews, and some Germans as their minorities.
But they didn't treat you necessarily well.
No.
So this is a picture of the town in 1939, which was the year that the war started. And this is a picture of the town from 1997, when we went back to visit. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Does it look really different?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll tell you more about that soon. So, Dad, can you tell them, what did you do for fun when you were growing up? Wait, hang on one second. What do you guys do after school?
Play video games.
Tell them, what did you do after school?
We after school we went to Cheder. And the Reverend Cheder used to let us out. There was an empty spot, and we used to play soccer.
How
We
did you
had
play
no,
soccer?
we had no soccer ball and no equipment on the field. There was no gate. We used to take two jackets, count up a few paces between the jacket, and these served as gates.
Those are the goals. And
Goals.
how did you get a ball then?
We didn't have a ball. Eventually, we did buy a soccer ball, but the problem was you had to smear it with lard, and there were no boys who would volunteer to go buy lard.
Do you know what lard is? Lard is pig fat. You had to keep the ball soft by putting pig fat on it. So, when you didn't have a ball, what did you kick?
We kicked a cat.
The ball was a cat. Interesting. Okay. So can you tell them?
We improvised.
Can you tell them? This, by the way, is the picture of the Polish soccer team from the World Cup in 1938. Are those shorts look like basketball shorts to you? Check out the ball. That's right. The ball is not black and white. Dad, can you tell them the story about the soccer team?
Yeah, on Sundays, there was no public school. Summer and winter we went to Cheder on Sunday. I have an older brother who was 2 years older than myself. We both went to the same Cheder, we had different rabbis, because I was younger. So he was an avid fan, soccer fan. And in a town 11 kilometers distant from our town, there was a soccer team. It was a primary league, and they were having a match on that Sunday. And my brother wanted to see that match. So he took me by the hand, and he said, let's walk to Yaroslavl. It was 11 kilometers. A 3-hour walk for small kids. We passed 3 villages where the peasant boys or kids used to put stones at us. Because we were dressed like Jews, we wore payas and scissors. They recognized us as Jews. So we walked. Before the town, there was a big mountain that you had to go up before that city. We walked up the mountain, and there was a balagula, a wagon driver coming our way, and he lived in the same town as we lived. And he recognized us, and he said, okay boys, I'll bring you home. Put us on the wagon, we rode home.
Because they cut school. They cut school. They almost got to the soccer game, but this guy brought them home. And was your father happy?
My father paid him.
So just imagine, I actually wanted to figure out how far is it. So from my father's town, Radymno, to Yaroslavl is 6.8 miles. So these, how old were you then? 8?
9.
9, and his brother
8
was
times, something like that.
They walked all that way, and then it's almost the same distance as from SAR to Yankee Stadium. Or if you think about how many years you live in New Rochelle.
Yeah.
All right, so it's almost the same as driving from here to New Rochelle. And imagine you're on the hutch, you're almost there, and then somebody says, oh, wait a second, aren't you guys supposed to be in school? And that was the end of that. So you had plenty of fun, even though it wasn't.
Yes, we did.
Okay. So can you tell us what happened on September 1st, 1939?
September 1st, school was supposed to open up. So instead of school, the war broke out between Poland and Germany. So instead of school, we had a bombing. And bombing. Airplanes, German airplanes invaded our town and bombed the city. And most of the people were hiding in orchards. Where I come from, the very rich soil. There are many, many orchards of apples and pears and plums and things like that. And that's where we were hiding. And I was never as afraid as that day.
And that was supposed to be the first day of school, right? Did you go to school?
Never again.
Never went back to school. So imagine this. Again, he was the same age as you, right? My father finished 3rd grade in June. And was supposed to start, probably played soccer all summer, is that right?
That was great.
Okay. He was supposed to start 4th grade on September 1st, but that's when the war started. And he never went back to school. Can you imagine that? How would you feel about that? If you finished school for the summer, yeah?
I would feel like the best thing in my life.
The best thing in your life just happened? Yeah.
How would you feel? I feel that I'd be so happy that I'd start like trucking apples and pears like that, using them like as dodgeballs and chucking them at walls.
Yeah.
And get out my section.
We're listening to each other.
Because I only finished in grade, there's a lot I didn't know. So I was supposed to get like a career, and also and also I have friends at school. And what was I supposed to do?
That's a great point. So that's a really good point. So I can imagine feeling like you guys, right? Being like, woohoo, no school. Right, but also scared, you said, right? Because there's a war. And then imagine that you're never allowed to go back to school. That's it. So what? Exactly. That's it.
You'll be homeschooled.
So, I'll tell you what my father's family Yeah, got it.
150,000 Jews survived in the Soviet Union. Polish Jews survived in the Soviet Union. It's a huge amount of people. And those who lived through the war years under German sway were killed off, exterminated. For every person who survived, 40 were killed, at least.
All right, we're going to talk about what happened to his family, but I just want to say one more thing about the school thing, because I always found it so interesting, and also I realized that I was the one in my family who could go to school. You know, I mean, once I got past 3rd grade, I thought, wow, I can keep going, right? And my father, he told you he was a phenomenal student. He's a really smart guy. He is. And he was dying to learn, and he couldn't go back to school. And I think that that's part of the reason that my parents' house is full of books, because school was not an option anymore. And as my father told you, he had one book all his years in Russia, which was about
how to make metal, iron, pig iron.
Interesting book to you?
And the Soviets were in the habit to appropriate the inventions to themselves. Iron is well known to have been invented at least 2 millennia ago, 2,000 years ago. But they claimed to be the inventors of the process.
Yeah, do you have questions?
If it was a book about making metal, and why don't you just make a metal suit and the metal
Why did you make armor to protect yourself?
We couldn't make any. We didn't have any.
Right, didn't have any use. So he knew how to make an iron factory, right? But no actual iron. So let's explain to them, Dad. You can explain better than I can. What happened when Hitler invaded Poland? Because that's what happened on September 1st, 1939. Hitler, who was the leader of Germany, the Nazi leader, attacked Poland. And what happened? Can you explain?
Well, they didn't attack Poland because the Soviets would have minded it very much. But prior to that, in the month of August, the Germans and the Soviets concluded a pact, which was called then the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. And they divided Poland in two along certain rivers.
So what happened was half of Poland, Germany and Russia split it. Half of Poland went to Germany and half of Poland went to Russia. And my father was very lucky to be in the half that went to Russia. Can you explain what happened to you next?
We were sent to Siberia.
Okay, let's explain to them why. Okay.
And it's too complicated.
Too complicated? We'll explain it simply.
I'll explain it.
You'll explain it?
Actually,
I can explain it. We'll explain it together. So what happened was the Soviet Union and Russia, they said to these families who ended up on this side, do you want to become citizens of the Soviet Union? And what did they say?
No.
we want to go home.
We want to go home. We want to go home to Poland, right? And they
Right.
said, you want to go home to Poland? You don't want to be citizens of our great country?
We can't trust. We can't trust you.
We can't trust you. You must be traitors. So they shipped them.
For 21 days in a train. In trains that went day and night. We were shipped to Siberia,
So they went from here for 21 days. This is Mongolia.
near the Mongolian border.
Siberia, right near the Mongolian border. Have you guys ever heard of Siberia? It's freezing. What else do you know?
I have a game.
That's forest, right?
Didn't they used to have a jail with Russians?
Yes, they had a jail, and all of the people who were sent from Poland were forced to be
In a camp.
not a camp, not like summer camp. What was the camp like?
The camps, they were supervised by the military. You had to do work. You had to meet a certain amount of, you have to do a certain amount of work, and as much work you have, as much as you could produce, that's how they fed you.
So what was your job?
I was too little to work.
Oh, you didn't work? Didn't you do?
Later on,
Oh, later on? Okay. So later on, which we'll go back to, but later on, your job was what?
cutting down the trees.
My father's job was to cut down trees.
It's white
Is that the kind of
birch.
trees?
Yeah.
White birch trees.
White birch.
How
We
old were you
clear
when that
cut
was
it.
done?
We clear cut it. Big and small, any tree with.
They cut it all down. My father once told me that he used to have nightmares of cutting down trees because he felt guilty. Now he feels guilty about cutting down the trees, but then you had no choice, right? You
Had to do it. And in the winter too, the snow falls, it's 2 meters, 2 yards high. And then you have to cut trees.
So how much snow would you say there was?
2 yards at least.
2 yards.
Mountains,
How many feet are
mountains
yards?
of snow.
3.
Okay, so 2 yards. So
6 feet.
Six feet of snow.
That's all. How old is he?
When he was 9. You're 9 when you were in Siberia? Yeah. Well, we have to go back to that. Yeah. Dad, what would happen if you didn't want to work?
They didn't feed you. It was away from the way.
Not much of a choice, right? Joseph?
No, I was not a POW.
POWs for
Prisoners of
people who
war.
were in the army. Probably.
How could he have been tall enough to be able to get over all that snow?
Okay, so the
6
question
feet.
is,
He
that's a good question. If you were 9 years old in Siberia, how could you walk in 6 feet of snow?
You do it on skis.
And where'd
You
get
make your own
skis
skis.
from? What'd you make them out of?
Out of boards.
Out of wood. They made their own skis. I might have a picture of that. No, these are people. Another job was to take the sap out of the trees. And what did they use that for?
Or explosives and other things.
Explosive. I didn't know you could make explosives out of tree sap. But
Goes through a chemical process.
yeah.
Was his brother also working?
Was your brother also working?
Of course.
Other questions? Yeah. Did you go to a concentration camp?
It was a sort of a concentration camp.
So the concentration camps that you've heard of where people were killed, those were controlled by the Germans. In Russia, it was primarily, not entirely, primarily forced labor camps where they were sort of slaves. Where did you live?
What?
Siberia, where did you live?
In barracks. Barracks were divided into one room habituates, and people lived in those rooms.
So it's made out of wood? It's like a
Made out of wood,
long
yes.
wood house with every family had one room.
Was it like a ghetto?
Was it like a ghetto?
Not quite.
It was more like,
It was more like a labor camp.
Yeah.
That's all.
where you had to work. Yes.
Was it like a long house?
A lighthouse, yes.
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 Good question. Clearly you studied the Native Americans. What? Oh, what's a barrack? What's a barrack?
A barrack is a lighthouse made of trees.
Looks like it's barracks.
So look at this. That's, maybe I spelled it wrong. I'm not the world's best speller.
No, that's how it's spelled. That's
Okay.
like train.
So, yes. After 2 years, Russia decided to join the war and fight against Germany. And what happened?
The Germans invaded
Okay.
the Soviet Union,
Go ahead.
and the Poles were forced by the English to make up with the Soviets, and all the Soviet citizens were freed from the camps. So we traveled to Central Asia, which was warm and was near the Iranian border.
So they went, and how'd you get there?
By train again.
By train. So let's see how they went. From Poland to Siberia, right? And then from Siberia, where it was very cold, to Uzbekistan,
Uzbekistan, near
which was
Tashkent.
warm. And where did you live there?
We lived in mud houses. They make houses out of mud, and the weather is very warm there, and they dry out. They're tiny little rooms, but they suffice to live in.
So
And they call them Kibitka.
Are they smelly inside?
are they smelly inside?
No,
But they had bed bugs, right?
yeah,
Bed bugs.
they learn to live with bed bugs.
How long was the train ride?
How long was the train ride? Do you remember? From Siberia to Uzbekistan?
2 weeks,
2 weeks.
14 days.
about.
What? The other trip took
So, we'll get to your question in a second. Something very interesting happened to my father's mother when they were living in a mud house like this. The family had been sick. Go ahead.
My mother and father and brother were sick with typhoid fever. And when they came back from the hospital, my mother had a dream that there was a treasure on the floor. And when she woke up, I was the only one who could handle a tool to dig for the treasure. And we found the treasure buried there, which contained paper banknotes which had gone bad. They were going, which were rotting.
So old money. They found old money in the floor or in the wall?
In the soil,
In the dirt of the dirt.
in the
house.
dirt of the floor.
And what happened with that?
We traded it in. There were some people who worked for the state bank, and they traded it in for money, for good money, and we had enough to go back to Siberia. Because Central Asia was under a lot of pressure. There were a lot of refugees in Central Asia, and illnesses of all sorts, epidemics of all sorts raged in that area. And we wanted to go away to Siberia.
So it was better to be in freezing Siberia. What was the temperature in Siberia in the winter?
50 below,
50 below in the winter. And what was it in the summer?
summer 100,
100.
and humid,
And humid and mosquitoes, right?
mosquitoes
So that was better though than living in
in Central Asia.
Central Asia. So we're not quite up to this yet, but so we went from Poland to Siberia to Central Asia, back to Siberia, and that's when you were 12, and that's when you were
Starting to work on the colchos.
yeah.
Were there any worms in what happened?
Were there any what worms? Were there worms in the mud house?
No, we killed them before.
There you go. Say again? Oh, he wants to know. You said that your brother and your mother and somebody else was sick, and they went to the hospital.
They came out.
Where was the hospital?
The hospital was in the same town, a few kilometers away.
I didn't know that.
What did he eat on the tree?
What did you eat on the tree?
And they gave us rations.
They gave them food. What did you do about kosher?
We didn't eat any meat. I didn't eat any meat for 6 years. My family happened to be observant. We didn't eat any meat.
And then how much do you like say? Southwest.
Yes, somebody else wanted to do that. Did they have what? Do they have a government in Siberia? Yes, they did. So Dad, you went back to Siberia, and then what happened? How long were you there? We'll take more questions at the end.
4 years.
So you
To
were there for 4 years.
1946. In June 1946, they allowed the Polish citizens to return to Poland.
And that's what the war was already over.
The war was over in 1945, in May 1945.
And so you went back to Poland, and what did you find?
We found Jew hatred, and we left for Austria. From Austria, we went to Italy, and in 1949, we came to the United States.
So last time, ready? Here's the test. From Poland to
Siberia.
Siberia to
Uzbekistan.
right, Uzbekistan to
Siberia.
then Siberia back to Poland, where they discovered their town was there's nobody left, right? The people who survived had survived in Siberia and in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And then they went to Austria. Why Austria?
Because there was a DP camp in Austria, and the Jewish agency was trying to put pressure on the world in order to gain independence in Israel. At that time it was called Palestine. The English ruled in Palestine. And they were not very keen on giving it to the Jews. So the Jews had to fight for their independence.
So while you were in Austria, my father, a DP camp, DP stands for displaced
Persons.
So that means people who no longer have a home.
Home, right. Homeless.
So they lived there, and there was actually a really exciting Jewish life there.
Yes.
What were some of the activities you did as a teenager there?
There were political parties exist. I was a member of the revisionist party, the Beitar.
So they were these were Zionist parties, groups of kids, really teenagers, who were trying to prepare to go to Israel and to advocate for the Jews to have their own country, which we're going to celebrate next week, right?
Right.
But for other reasons, my father ended up in Italy and then came to the United States, where somebody asked, why did he go to school then? Then he had to support his family. So how old were you?
19.
19, and he started a fruit business in the Bronx.
And I was in that business for 52
He
years.
was in that, right?
Thank God.
Yeah. No, now he's retired. So do you guys have other questions? Yeah. No, my uncle. Could you sleep outside the mud house if you didn't want to sleep in the mud house?
We didn't try.
Do you ever camp outside your house? Oh, you do?
I went to camp. I liked it so much. I was there for 6 years.
Why did he go to Uzbekistan?
Why did you go to Uzbekistan? Can you explain that again?
Because it was warmer weather. It was near the Iranian border. We hoped to be able to cross the border and flee from the Soviet Union.
So they wanted to get out of the Soviet Union through Iran.
Or China, or whatever.
Dad, why did you go to Italy? From
Well,
Austria.
because it was easy to board a ship for the United States.
So they got
And that-
tickets to come to the United States and you left from Italy.
There was a war under Truman. They admitted 104,000 DPs to the United States. And they didn't discriminate against anyone.
So what year did you come to the United States?
1949.
1940.
December 1949. Unforgettable.
Oh, good question. Dad, when did you learn how to speak English?
I had an English teacher in Austria.
Okay, tell us this is actually interesting. Who was your English teacher? Remember, he was very smart.
He used
So
to
your
be-
parents were willing to pay for him to be educated.
My English teacher was a former professor at the University of Graz. He taught English. During the war, he claimed to have been in Denmark.
But you were pretty convinced that he had been a Nazi,
Yes.
right? He had been a Nazi in Germany. My father's English teacher, but once the Germans lost the war, then those people were sort of out of a
Work.
home, out of work. And he was my father's private tutor, and that's how he learned English. Dad, how many languages do you speak? Yeah, that's name them, right?
How many?
7.
7?
Do we hear that?
What are they? Yiddish?
Yiddish,
Oh, Jordan
Polish,
wants to tell us. Turn around, tell us. Yiddish, Polish, English,
Russian,
Russian,
German, and a bit of Hebrew.
and a bit of Hebrew. And
Do
a
we
bit
hear
of
that? Do we hear that? Do we speak Russian? Do we speak Russian?
English?
Yes. Should we take 3 more questions? Forgot what to say. Raise your hand again if you remember. I think you asked a question, right? Anybody who didn't? Yeah. I know. Say
This is the last question. Let's
Okay, so she wants to know if your parents had to work in Siberia, but you can also tell them about it afterwards. Did your parents have to work in Siberia?
Yes. My mother was a cook. she used to prepare 2 meals,
So,
which was distributed later. And my father worked with horses.
so an interesting thing though was that my grandmother did not work in Poland. In fact, she had somebody come and do laundry. She had
And the maid,
they had a maid, they had a nanny, but that life ended, and she volunteered to do this, right? Can you tell them why she volunteered?
because it was easy to put in a little more water and get another soup for the family.
Right, so she volunteered to be the cook so that they could have more, she could get more food for her family. to feed her. I think we said we take 2 more questions. Okay, so I guess the question is, while your parents were at work, what were you doing in Siberia?
Picking mushrooms, the berries, the roots of food.
He was hanging out in the woods. Last question. Last question? That's okay. All right.
Go ahead, really loud.
Or did he go to a different state first?
So where did you first come in America? Where did you land? Do you want to tell them a little bit?
New York. We landed in New York. As a matter of fact, I had a cousin. He was a famous man. He died in his 90s. He was a teacher, a mathematics teacher, a professor of mathematics. He had been fired by the New York State. He was a high school teacher, but he was fired in the mid-50s because he would not admit to having been a member of the Communist Party, which he was. Because in 1938, he and his new wife traveled to the Soviet Union, and they stopped by in our house in Poland.
And he got you the tickets to come? He got
No.
you permission? Oh no, he picked you up? No.
Because of him, our citizenship was delayed for 2 extra years. That was the era of McCarthy.
So you guys will probably hear a lot more stories today or next year or things like that. But I think one of the interesting things about my father's story is that when they were sent to Siberia, they thought nothing worse could possibly happen to them. And yet it was actually one of the best things that happened to them. Despite the 50 below degrees in the winter, despite the 6 feet of snow.
We got used to eating less, and we got used to getting cold at times, and we survived, which was of essence.
And the whole family survived together.
So the bottom line.
The bottom line. Is there anything else you want to add? Dad, is there anything else?
No.
All right, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.